Greetings, Jellyspoons. Welcome back to another Monday Madness. Now, I may be very echoey and weird here because I'm moving and painting and decorating and doing a load of crazy things, so please forgive me if this video sounds a little bit different to usual. For this episode of Monday Madness, may I bring you back to one of my favourite places in the entire world, the Neverland. That's right, Mauku's nose is back on the Peter Pan content again. I am not sorry. How well did the 2003 Peter Pan movie do in terms of the Peter Pan story? Let me know down in the comments below, what did you think of the 2003 Peter Pan movie? Have you seen it? Have you not? Why and why not? What are your favourite movie adaptions and what are your least favourite movie adaptions? Do you like Peter Pan like me? Do you have another favourite? Let me know down in the comments below. I would argue this movie, the 2003 Peter Pan, is actually more about Wendy than it is about any other character, including its titular character, Peter Pan. And the fact that they changed around the opening sentence actually hints at this. Let me explain. The fact that they changed it from all children except one grow up into all children grow up except one. This shows that they're actually focusing more on Wendy Darling, because originally it's all children except one grow up. And that is talking about the children of the world as a whole, but Peter specifically. He is the exception, he is the special child. Whereas, putting Peter at the end, you're making the statement to begin with, all children grow up. And this is including Wendy and showing you that this is going to be a story about the all children that grow up and the fact that all children have to, except one, is the catalyst. Peter Pan is the catalyst of this story, as opposed to the main character. It's interesting to me, the fact that they did that. All right, let's move past the opening line, shall we, and get to the rest of the movie. Now, we move into the first scene and the first shot of the Peter Pan 2003 movie. It goes into the Darling's nursery, which is where the play and the book classically start. Now, Wendy Darling is busy telling a story to her younger brothers. All accurate so far. However, the story she is telling is Cinderella. Now, this is also book accurate. Peter asks Wendy about the story Cinderella that her mother was telling them, and Wendy tells him the ending of Cinderella later. However, Wendy's version of Cinderella in this movie is very different. Wendy tells Cinderella as a story about Cinderella fighting her way through pirates, and at some point she flies through the air, I think. Now, this is interesting and immediately tells us what the movie is doing with Wendy Darling's character. Wendy Darling is retelling the story of Cinderella and making Cinderella the sort of, romantic heroine princess into a badass action fighter. She also mentions the name Red-Handed Jill, which comes up later on in the movie and I'll talk more about it then, so put a pin in that one for now. But the fact that Wendy is changing around Cinderella's character and saying things like, "Who be you to call me girly," and then fighting with the swords and play fighting with her brothers, this shows exactly what this movie has done with Wendy Darling's character. Wendy is made into ever so slightly less of the desperate romantic heroine and more of a take charge of her own business. She does try to make her own decisions, make her own impact on the other characters, and of course she does fight with a sword as well. I'll talk about what's problematic about that later on. Moving on next, we get to Mr. and Mrs. Darling. I really love Mrs. Darling. I have very little to say about her character in this review simply because she's stunning. What they did with her outfits, the way she holds herself, everything she says and does is absolutely almost as accurate as it possibly can be, and Mrs. Darling is a wonderful character who I love very, very much. I have no bad words to say about Mrs. Darling. I really like that they included Mrs. Darling's sweet mocking mouth and the fact that she had a hidden kiss as well. That's a very important detail from the book. Mr. Darling, however, Jason Isaacs is one of my favourite actors in the entire world. What did you do to him? They pushed it a little bit too far for me in terms of both comedy and villainy. He is portrayed as both ridiculous and awful, and really he was neither. Who the hell is Aunt Millicent and why is she here? Both the Disney version and the 2003 version of Peter Pan seem to have this obsession with Mr. and Mrs. Darling and the Darling family forcing Wendy to grow up too soon or ahead of when she's ready. Now, this isn't actually true in the original text. Mr. and Mrs. Darling make no effort to force Wendy to grow up at all. That's all an internal struggle that Wendy has to deal with herself. And Aunt Millicent being there sort of just to force the issue, really, I don't like it very much. And needless to say, Liza the maid didn't push that in the original either. All right, I'm just gonna say it. The entire scene, from the moment Wendy Darling is caught drawing pictures of Peter in her school book, to the letter being written, to Wendy and her brothers and Nana going skidding through the bank and everything going everywhere, that entire scene is just painful and also very inaccurate. Another point that was inaccurate, but that I am willing to let slide, was when Mrs. Darling spoke to her children about her husband just before she went out. So Mr. Darling has just chained Nana up in the yard, and Mrs. Darling speaks to her children and says that he has made many sacrifices for his family and that there are different types of bravery. She says that Mr. Darling has never brandished a sword or fired a pistol, but he put away many dreams and sacrificed a lot for his family. When asked by her children where Mr. Darling put his dreams away, Mrs. Darling says that he put them away in a drawer, and at night they will get them out and admire them. But she goes on to say that it gets harder and harder to close the drawer, but Mr. Darling always does, and that is why he's brave. This scene is entirely not book accurate at all, but it's exactly the kind of thing that Mrs. Darling would say. And technically, it does have one accuracy. The idea of putting away your dreams in a drawer and getting them out to admire them is very similar to what Mrs. Darling does in the original story. At night, while her children are asleep, she will tidy up their minds, much as you would tidy up a drawer. She takes out their nastier thoughts and tucks them away at the bottom of their minds, getting out their fresher, happier thoughts and putting them on the top, so that the next day they can wake up ready to put on their nicer thoughts. So the idea of putting away your dreams in a drawer and getting them out to admire them is a very similar parallel to what she did in the books. So I will definitely give this scene a pass. It's very sweet, a very beautiful insight into Mrs. Darling's character, and it does give you a tiny bit of redemption for their version of Mr. Darling as well. The next very accurate scene we have is Peter as he watches Mr. and Mrs. Darling leaving the house and going off to their party. In the original story, Peter is indeed watching the house so that he knows when the parents are away so he can come inside to reclaim his shadow. And then of course he comes in to get the shadow and Tinkerbell gets shut up in the drawer. All very book accurate so far. Woohoo! A lot of the following dialogue between Peter and Wendy is also very accurate. Boy, why are you crying? What is your name? Peter Pan, Wendy Moore, Angela Darling, etc, etc. And one thing that I was absolutely delighted about, and anyone who has watched me on this channel before will definitely know what I mean when I say this, there is no star. In the original story, the original text, the play, and the book, when Wendy asks Peter, "Where do you live?" Peter responds thusly, "Second to the right and straight on till morning." Wendy then says, "That's a funny address." "No, it isn't." "Well, that's what they put on the letters." "Don't get any letters." "But your mother gets letters." "Don't have a mother." And that's how that story continues. But the important thing is, it's not second star to the right and straight on till morning. It's just second to the right and straight on till morning. See my other videos to explain about why. Huge accuracy points. Moving on. I really did like the fact that at the very beginning, Peter is not actively seeking Wendy out. It's always Wendy who comes to him. Now this does go down the shitter a little bit later on because Peter takes her hand several times and they sort of bump shoulders and they get awkwardly, romantically close, and that's a whole point that I'll touch on later as we go on. But I would like to give him a few little props at the beginning because Peter does actively recoil from Wendy several times. Peter's cockiness, the fact that Wendy withdraws to her bed, and Peter's description of the Lost Boys are all very accurate as well. They also got it accurate that Peter does not know what a kiss is, and so Wendy gives him a thimble. They also got it accurate the very awkward moment where Peter says, "Oh, well, shall I give you a kiss?" And Wendy, knowing that she just pretended that a thimble was a kiss, still expects a real kiss from Peter and sort of offers her mouth or her cheek. It's very awkward to watch and it is quite funny in the original play as well, but yeah, they got that accurate. Peter's backstory is very accurate as well, the fact that he ran away because his parents were talking about what he was going to be when he became a man. He then went to Kensington Gardens, lived among the fairies, eventually ended up in the Neverland. All very accurate. However, it's unlikely that he met Tinkerbell in Kensington Gardens because despite him being the ageless, never growing up boy, he obviously did age a little bit between being the baby who ran away from home and being the very young child who lives in the Neverland. Tinkerbell, as a fairy, does not live very long, and in fact, between Peter dropping Wendy off and then coming back to get her for spring cleaning time, Tinkerbell has long since died. So it's very unlikely that Tinkerbell would have been alive in Kensington Gardens and gone with him to the Neverland. It's much more likely that he met her on the island. Also, Wendy Darling does believe in fairies. At no point does she ever say, "I don't believe in fairies," and Peter have to stop her. Peter actually just explains it straight off the bat that anytime a child says that they don't believe in fairies, a fairy somewhere falls down dead. However, the fact that Wendy Darling initially doesn't believe in fairies does hint into this whole Wendy Darling story arc they've got going on. The fact that she is in fact growing up and getting into an older mental state, and she is growing up despite her unwillingness to do so, and the fact that she's very upset by the way that particularly Aunt Millicent is trying to force it on her. She does have a lot of grown-up tendencies and eventually will grow up of her own accord. The fact that Tinkerbell pulls on Wendy's hair to stop her from giving Peter a thimble is also very accurate. The fact that they never actually kiss, I wish it was the entire movie. Sadly, it's not, but at this point in the movie, the fact that she does not manage to actually kiss his lips is accurate to the original play too. Something else which is original book and play accurate that I find very interesting is the fact that when Peter hears about the ending of Cinderella, he rushes to go and tell the Lost Boys. Wendy stops him. It's Wendy who calls Peter back and says, "Don't go, I know such lots of stories." She does the same thing in this movie. Now, contrary to popular belief, Peter Pan did not come to the Darlings' nursery intending to take Wendy away to the Neverland. He actually only came to listen to the stories, and in this instance, to retrieve his shadow. He didn't actually plan on taking Wendy with him at all, but Wendy, as in the book and the play, Wendy tempts Peter by saying she knows lots of stories and she could tell them to the Lost Boys. And at that point, Peter has the idea and decides he wants to take her with him. The next accuracy comes very quickly. Peter is indifferent to taking John and Michael to the Neverland. In the movie, I would say that he's a little bit more pissed off. He pretends, he's sort of smiling at Wendy as he goes like, yeah, okay, go get your brothers. And then when she's moved, the camera keeps on Peter's face and he just immediately goes from smiling to which is funny, but Peter wasn't actually that annoyed about it in the original. The next bit that's accurate is actually poor Nana. She does notice that something is going on with the children. She realizes she is running out of time and she pulls at her chains in the garden and runs to go and fetch Mr. and Mrs. Darling. flying, which means that the scene of her crashing into the party to come and get them is accurate. However, she doesn't do the dramatic slide across the floor and knock all the bankers flying. She actually runs in, throws up her paws, and Mr. and Mrs. Darling immediately realise something terrible is happening in our nursery, and they race home without saying anything to the host whatsoever. So another technically accurate moment, but ruined by the fact that they pushed it too far to turn it into a comedy moment instead. The flying scene is very accurate, Peter telling the children that they just need to think happy thoughts, and they all try and fail several times by falling on their faces. Peter, laughing, then gives them the fairy dust as well, and eventually they are able to fly around the room. He then tempts them out of the Darlings' nursery by saying that they have pirates and they have mermaids, and the children are like, yes, let's go. So that entire scene was pretty accurate, apart from the very awkward, romantic Peter blowing fairy dust in Wendy's face. That was just a little bit too touchy for the original Peter Pan. The slow motion scene of Mr. and Mrs. Darling and Nana running up to the nursery to try and catch their children is kind of heartbreaking, and the idea that if they got there then it would have been happy for them but there would have been no story for us is very accurate to the original book and the way that Barry wrote that as well. And god damn, I wrote this in capital letters, the flying music is beautiful. The flight to the Neverland is very, very strange. I don't know why they're in space, but okay. There is one tiny hint of accuracy though, when Peter forgets who John is and says, "Who are you?" and John has to remind him of his name. That is accurate, and if you want to know more about the flight to the Neverland, check out my Dark Facts About Peter Pan video. Next up, accuracy-wise, I will say the Neverland looks badass. This island is a bolt of light, it's amazing, it's wonderful. Do not change a thing, the Neverland looks amazing. And I will give you massive, massive points for accuracy there. The pirates getting out the big cannon and shooting Long Tom at Peter and Wendy, John and Michael is accurate. However, Captain Hook is definitely falling under the same sort of category as Mr. Darling. He's made out to be far too comedic. While he does have comedic moments in the original story and play, he definitely would never have been stupid enough to shoot at his own mast. This is a notorious, amazing pirate we're talking about here. He is not that dumb. The Neverland being different without Peter is accurate, but at no point does Barry describe that it ices over or anything like that. If the pirates and the Lost Boys meet, they don't actually tend to engage much when Peter's not there. It's almost like playtime is muted and calm, and then when Peter returns, it's all up with adventure again. They do get some points for accuracy in terms of the seasons on the Neverland. They all come at once. However, you cannot predict the time that they will come, and in fact, it's always interchangeable. So you could go out to fetch water from a well, and by the time you've got back, you could have gone past one season or all four of them twice. Alright, I would like to just talk about Jason Isaacs' amazing Captain Hook. His hair is not quite perfect enough, he does look a bit scruffy around the edges, but other than that, everything is spot on. Some major key points here. The hook is on the right hand. I appreciate that it is very difficult, particularly because most people will be right-handed, I appreciate it is very difficult to learn to wield a sword in your left hand so that you can be book accurate and have the hook in your right hand. Jason Isaacs does it. He has the hook on his right hand, and it just makes me very happy. Okay, very points for accuracy. Also, huge point of accuracy here. Now, this is some attention to detail that means that I just know whoever was involved in doing this movie, they read the source material, they know the source material. I just cannot get over this one tiny detail. Okay, Captain Hook on his arm has a tattoo. Now, it's never talked about in the original whether he has tattoos or not, so the tattoo itself is irrelevant. What it is of is amazing. The tattoo Captain Hook, Jason Isaacs' Captain Hook, has on his arm is the insignia of Eton School. That is the school that Captain Hook attended when he was a boy. So the fact that he has the tattoo there, he is obsessed with it. Actually, Floriet Etona, the school's motto, is his final words in the original text before he goes to the crocodile. The fact that they gave him that tattoo just, again, it means they paid so much attention to detail, which does make me more annoyed about the things that they clearly chose to ignore. However, that tattoo, 10,000 points for accuracy on that one. Next points for accuracy here come that Tinkerbell does in fact go to the Lost Boys and she lies to them. She tells them that Peter Pan wants them to shoot down the Wendy bird. And it is of course Tootles, poor Tootles, whose arrow goes through Wendy's heart and shoots her down. More points for accuracy when the boys try to hide the body from Peter, and then points as well because when Peter looks at Wendy dead, he doesn't seem too upset. He doesn't seem quite so puzzled as the original Peter Pan would have him. In the original, Peter was not so much pained as puzzled when he looked at dead Wendy, but they do get points for accuracy because he doesn't exactly break down crying. He is quite confused by it. More points for accuracy because Peter takes the arrow and he is about to kill Tootles, murdering Tootles to even the scales in retaliation because Tootles ended up murdering Wendy, but he is then stopped because they realise Wendy is alive. They then agree to build a little house around Wendy, that's all accurate as well, and it's also accurate that Peter is very upset with Tinkerbell when it is revealed that Tinkerbell was behind Wendy's almost demise. However, he's a lot more cruel to her in this movie than he is in the original text. Originally he says he wants to banish her forever, but ends up changing his mind and saying, oh okay, just for a whole week then. In this version, he actually throws her, physically throws her away. So points for accuracy up until a point, but Peter chucking Tinkerbell, yeah, major down points. That is not something he would do. The home under the ground is the next thing I want to talk about briefly because I have mentioned it a lot in other videos. So the home under the ground, while it looks beautiful, and I love the underground set here, and I will give them points for accuracy for that, the way they get into it is not accurate. It's not one giant tree, as I've said many times before. The home under the ground is accessed by different trees. Each Lost Boy and Wendy, John and Michael have their own tree, which fits you, and you go up and down the tree, so you've all got your own entrances. The home under the ground is like a giant sort of bunny burrow. It's buried under the ground. It's not under a tree. You access it by several trees. The next inaccuracy is that John and Michael were actually already there when Wendy woke up. They have this whole thing in the movie where they run off and get chased by a crocodile, and then they see Tiger Lily and the pirates. It's kind of interesting, and I think I know why the movie did it. So points for inaccuracy, but in the movie's defense, I think they were just trying to give John and Michael more things to do because bless them, in the original text, they really are side characters. This then leads us in a very inaccurate way to the next scene of the movie, which is their replacement for Marooner's Rock. I do love the mermaids though, so I'll give them points for accuracy. Those mermaids are creepy as hell. They try to drown Wendy, all very, very accurate. And now we come to the big sort of fight thing that happens in this weird replacement for the Marooner's Rock scene. So first off, Peter takes Wendy there, gives her a sword and says, do you know how to fight? And Wendy actually does. This is the culmination of what Wendy was doing beforehand. She's changed the character of Cinderella around, and in fact, Wendy's character has been changed around here as well. She is not just the docile heroine, she can fight with a sword. But she does end up feeling a little bit like a Mary Sue kind of character in this movie. I think it would have been more interesting for her character development if she had gone to the Neverland, learned how to fight, maybe from Peter, sorry, I like Peter teaching people stuff, and then she had taken that fighting instinct back home with her and fought for her right to grow up, but in her own terms. Having her come to the Neverland already able to fight, and being able to fight because she practiced in her bedroom. Anyway, glossing over all of that, Wendy can already fight, and is actually good enough to fight with the pirates and Peter. It's an interesting choice, and I don't so much mind that she can fight, I just mind the how and the why as to how she learned how to fight. Peter then imitates Hook's voice, getting Tiger Lily freed. All of that is very accurate and very funny. And then we have the fight between Hook and Peter. I really love that Peter actually does end up injured as well from this fight with Captain Hook. While it is happening in a very weird and strange way, and it's not quite how Marooner's Rock did play out, and they have that weird thing with the net, it's very cool. I do like seeing Peter actually not win a lot of the time. It's much more interesting than watching him just be a victor the whole way through. I like seeing him downtrodden and then having to build himself back up again. Now in the original text, Peter and Hook both scale Marooner's Rock as they're fighting, and they both try to catch a breath. Peter realizes he's more higher up the rock than his foe, gives Hook a hand, and Hook claws him twice with the iron hook, meaning that Peter is too injured to fly away or to swim, and ultimately nearly drowns on Marooner's Rock. In this version, Captain Hook injures him by fighting. You can actually see the hook digging into Peter's flesh at his throat, and it's ripping and tearing. I really like that. That probably says something about me. I like my characters to get hurt, I'm sorry about it. Overall, it plays out fairly accurately in that the crocodile comes up later on and Hook has to run away from the crocodile. However, I am very sad that Peter says the line, "To die will be an awfully big adventure," in defiance. I like that he's defiant of Captain Hook, I understand why they put it where they did, but the fact that they have him saying it as a retort and a retaliation in that moment, as almost a sort of cocky, "To die will be an awfully big adventure, old man," like, you know, when he's about to get killed, it has a lot more emphasis, it makes a stronger point, and it's way more emotionally impactful. It has a stronger beat to it if you do it by the original, which is where Peter is completely alone and thinks he's about to drown. He's standing on Marooner's Rock, night is falling, there is literally no one else there on the lagoon, it's just darkness, rising waters, and Peter stands there thinking he's about to die and says, "To die will be an awfully big adventure." So I like this scene, but I'm very sad that we lost out on that particular moment. Also, it means that once again in an adaptation of Peter Pan, we missed the most underrated character in the whole story, the Neverbird. Go watch my Neverbird video, just go do it. I'm so sad. We missed the Neverbird. I love her to pieces. Next up, the fairy dance scene. It's technically inaccurate in that it's an extra added scene that wasn't in the original story, but I really love it. It's beautiful, it shows you more of the Neverland and the inhabitants there, and I don't mind Peter taking Wendy and dancing with Wendy. He does show her things, that's part of what he does on the Neverland, but a lot of the time he doesn't take anyone with him on some of his adventures, so it's both inaccurate and not in that sense. I do like the fact that they imitate the dance. Peter bows to Wendy and they both dance and fly up into the air, imitating the fairies. As with Peter, he does it because he's copying, he's playing pretend. Wendy, true to her character in accurate terms, does take it as more than it actually is. While Peter is playing, Wendy is desperately seeking that romance that just is never going to happen. While it never happened in the original story in quite that way, the ensuing argument is fairly accurate. The way the scene plays out has a similar feel to the original story and text, however, the wording is slightly different, and in a way, the movie does it a disservice because it's too blatant, it's too obvious, there's no subtext. Wendy quite literally says to Peter, "But what about your feelings? Sadness, happiness, hate, love?" And Peter is responding to this. And he claims that he has never heard of love and he's never felt it. And Wendy does her whole, "I think you had actually for something or someone, hint, 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 me." But actually, in the original story, Wendy never comes out and says it. It's all in the subtext. And the thing is that Peter doesn't understand and never will. He still doesn't feel the love and the emotions like that. But yeah, it's a bit too blatant in this movie. It's far too clearly stated. The outcome is the same. They end up arguing and Peter walks away. But the way they get there, it's just not quite right for me in this. In the 2003 movie, they do the same thing that Disney did, and I'm not sure why. They have Captain Hook convince Tinkerbell to betray Peter Pan. I never liked this as a plot point because no matter how sad Tinkerbell is that Peter has banished her for a week or however long it may be, and no matter how jealous and upset and hurt and pissed off she is at Wendy, Tinkerbell would never turn on Peter like that. So I really don't like that they used Disney's idea on this one either. Major points for inaccuracy there. It also means that Tinkerbell ends up flirting with a parrot, and yeah, that's just more screen time that could have been used for something else. We then have a scene where Peter flies back to the Darlings' nursery and tries to shut the window. Now this is accurate, but it comes at the wrong moment. At the very end of the original story, Peter rushes ahead of the Darling children and he goes to their nursery, shuts the window and bars it, and then is about to go and leave by the door. However, Peter never had to actually struggle against the Darling parents to keep the window shut. He just changed his mind and reopened it. I get what they were going for though, it's like the metaphor, isn't it? That the Darlings' love overpowers Peter and they keep the window open. However, as with a lot of other things in this movie, they get a few sprinkled on points for inaccuracy because they just took it a little bit too far. The next point for inaccuracy unfortunately comes at the expense of some of the character development that they've given Wendy Darling in this movie. And it's when Wendy Darling is taken to the pirate ship and speaks to Captain Hook. This scene plays out in a very similar way to Captain Hook trying to convince Mr. Banning's children in the Hook movie to join his side. Captain Hook speaks to Wendy and talks to her about her feelings for Peter and how Peter will never have feelings and how no, he cannot love. Hook mentions at one point that it is part of the riddle of Peter's being, and that is the fact that he cannot love. Now, the riddle of his being is actually a line from the stage directions of the play that Barry wrote in the original text, so the concept of the riddle of Peter's being is actually accurate, so I'll give them points for including that, even though it wasn't originally a piece of dialogue. And now we come back to that concept of red-handed Jill. The name red-handed Jill is actually slightly accurate to the original source material. Let me explain. At the very end of the movie, when Captain Hook has all of the Lost Boys, Wendy, John and Michael, on the pirate ship, he says that he's about to make them all walk the plank, but he has room for 2 cabin boys, and he offers 2 of the Lost Boys to come and join him and be pirates. John and Michael actually nearly take him up on this offer. While John is talking to Captain Hook about it, Captain Hook says, "Did you ever think of being a pirate?" And John says that he once thought of calling himself Red-Handed Jack. Captain Hook says it's a great name and that he would call him that if he joins up to become a pirate. I'm not sure why they decided to take John's red-handed pirate name and give it to Wendy. I kind of feel like calling herself Cinderella may have made more sense in this context. But it is what it is, so technically the name Red-Handed Jill, they do get some points for accuracy on that, even though it's with the wrong Darling sibling. She gets back to the home under the ground. Peter arrives back and says that the mermaids have told him that there's a new pirate aboard the Jolly Roger and they're going to go and fight her. The scene continues and Wendy gets annoyed and frustrated and ends up standing up and declaring that she is Red-Handed Jill and she is going to become a pirate. Her and Peter argue and it turns into a sword fight. Wendy brandishes a sword at Peter Pan. Now all this is okay, and while it's not the kind of character development I would have written for Wendy Darling, I get it. Okay, it's inaccurate as hell, but okay. But this is where they lost me completely. Wendy Darling brandishes her sword at Peter Pan and says, "Ready yourself, Peter Pan, for I am Red-Handed Jill." And then Peter and Wendy have a sword fight. Or rather, they don't. Wendy Darling, who has been fighting pirates and shown to be the badass new version of Cinderella, Red-Handed Jill with a sword, fights Peter Pan for literally 2 clashes of their swords. It's not even 10 seconds. They literally go ching, ching, and then Peter has her at sword point and she is defeated. The thing is, for me, if you're gonna make Wendy into a sword fighter, at least have her fight Peter for longer than 2 seconds. No, I don't think Wendy would have won. I don't think she would even have come close. This is Peter Pan after all. He defeats Captain Hook. However, you could have had a moment where he was shocked and surprised by the fact that she was fighting him and then fighting him well. You know, but no, they didn't do that. However, within that whole scene, there was one piece of accuracy. Wendy is talking to John Michael and the Lost Boys. She's thinking about how she can't really remember the details of her old life, and she starts asking John and Michael questions about who is their father, who is their mother. Now this is playing on an original plot point from the play and the book. Wendy used to set John and Michael quiz questions, asking them things like, who was taller, mother or father? Who lived in the kennel? Describe mother's eyes, describe mother's evening dress, what colour was father's hair, that kind of thing. And over time she got very startled to realise just how much her brothers were forgetting and how much she was forgetting as well. So her worrying about it and asking her brothers those questions is actually fairly accurate, so some points for accuracy in that entire scene of just utter chaos. After Wendy has fought Peter, she then announces that no, she's not going to be a pirate, she's not going to be Red-Handed Jill, she's going home, and she's taking her brothers with her, and actually ends up taking all the rest of the Lost Boys as well. One of the lines she says to Peter at this point in the movie is, "You're just a boy." While this line is not accurate to the original source material, the sentiment behind it is. One of the last things that Wendy says to Peter in the original text is, "What are your exact feelings to me?" And Peter responds, "Those of a devoted son." Wendy is frustrated by this because obviously it's not the answer she wants to hear, even though really she knows that Peter cannot and will not give her any other answer. So her saying, "You're just a boy," in the movie has a similar sort of impact. It's less angry and more sad, but it means the same thing. She's saying, you are always going to be a boy, and she doesn't want a boy. She wants a man. This is the pivotal moment in both the original and the 2003 movie. Wendy has made her decision, which really was made already, all along. Wendy is one of the ones who is happy to grow up. She wants to grow up, and she will do so. She cannot and will not be able to take Peter with her. For me, that's the more interesting side of her character. The fact that she realizes that when you grow up, you have to leave some things and some people and some ideas behind you. However, in the 2003 movie, they almost play on the fact that Peter is the one missing out here. The fact that he refuses to grow up and come with Wendy is played as his downfall, rather than Wendy's realization. As Wendy and the Lost Boys leave the home under the ground, we have some more accuracies to do with Peter's character here. Peter plays on his pipes and ignores Wendy as she's leaving, acting like he couldn't care less. This is very accurate to the play and the book. Wendy then reminds Peter to take his medicine and departs. Reminding him to take his medicine is also accurate and very important for the next part of the story. The next thing that they include, which is accurate as well, is Peter having bad dreams. That is a point of great interest in the original book and the play, and at some point I will do a video just discussing what I think Peter could be dreaming about, but more on that at a later point. It's accurate, I love that they included it. The next accurate point is that Captain Hook does get down into the home under the ground, but he cannot reach Peter from where he is. So he poisons Peter's medicine cup with a vial of poison that he carries on him at all times. But before Peter can take his medicine, of course, the valiant Tinkerbell drinks every single drop and dies. Peter's immediate worry and sadness and absolute terror over the fact that he is about to lose Tinkerbell is very book and play accurate. Peter is absolutely torn apart when he thinks Tinkerbell is dying. He is desperate to try and save her, and so in the original story, he calls out to all the children who are dreaming of the Neverland and asks them to clap their hands if they believe in fairies. They do change this around in the movie, so technically I'll have to take away some points here because it's very inaccurate what they do next, but I will have to boost them a lot of points because the raw emotion they put into this scene is absolutely golden. Peter actually carries Tinkerbell outside of the home under the ground and desperately cries, "I do believe in fairies." I like what they did with it, and it does mean the same thing. Rather than asking the children to clap, he's asking them to say that they believe in fairies. It does and means the same thing, so they get points for inaccuracy, but again, it's so beautifully done, I cannot hate them for this at all. One of the next real accuracies that they have is Peter declaring, "Hook or me this time." In the original play, it's hinted at in the stage directions that this is the mood that Peter has as he abandons the home under the ground and goes to fight the pirates, but it does become a line of dialogue when it goes into the book. Then we move into some more inaccuracies. We're on the pirate ship, and Hook is demanding that Wendy tells him the story of Peter Pan. I really don't like how they described Peter in Wendy's story at all, and more to the point, that's how she sees him. However, I will say, the idea that happy thoughts bring you up and sad thoughts bring you down is an interesting one. Something else about this last scene on the pirate ship that made me really excited when I was watching this movie is another accuracy. Now bear with me here. The way it's lit is very accurate to the original play. Barry describes that they need to have open dark amber flooding the back, dark amber flooding the upper deck, and more amber all over the stage as well. So the fact that they decided to light this scene in a very amber red way is very accurate and made me really happy when I was watching it. It was like watching the play done properly. Moving into the next and last fight between Hook and Peter. Again, I love the brutality of it. Peter has blood dripping down the side of his face. Captain Hook is going full throttle. He's swiping at the sails. Peter's darting back and forth in the air. You can see them going at it. This has been choreographed so well, with every clash of steel steel. You can feel it. You can feel the weight of Hook's blade, the sting of his claw, and the fact that Peter's using both hands to drive him backwards. You can feel this fight, and I love it. They then include more play-accurate text, such as, "So Pan, this is all you're doing. I, James Hook, it's all my doing." All very play-accurate, and I absolutely love it. One thing that did really vex me, though, is Captain Hook being able to fly. While it does give us some very cool visuals, and I do appreciate what they were going for, grown-ups actually can't fly, canonically. The power to fly literally leaves you when you grow up. You not only forget how to, you cannot do it. No amount of fairy dust and happy thoughts is going to make it happen. Grown-ups just cannot fly. So Captain Hook being able to is very inaccurate, and while I really hate to say it, because god damn it, I love Jason Isaacs, it just, yeah, that whole scene could have taken place on the deck of the Jolly Roger and it would have been just as cool. As I said before, it's interesting to play on the idea of Peter having unhappy thoughts that bring him down, but actually Peter's unhappy thoughts, that's what manifests in his nightmares. Again, I'll do a whole video on Peter's nightmares at some point later on if anyone is interested. Hell, I'll do it anyway because I'm interested. But yeah, the whole idea that happy thoughts let you fly and sad thoughts bring you down, I get it. It's an interesting idea. It feels a bit too basic for Neverland for me. However, I really do enjoy Peter's line of going, "I'm the best there ever was," and I intend to say that to myself and many other people every day of my life from now on. What I really like is a tiny touch that they added when Peter is looking up at Captain Hook lying on his back. Reflected in Peter's eyes, you can just see starlight. I love this. I did a video explaining about what I think Peter Pan looks like. Ba-ding! This fits how I see him so well. He is bedecked in starlight and sunlight, and having that moment in the movie where I can literally see stars in his eyes, I love that so much. So I'm gonna give them loads of points. That was beautiful. An amazing piece of cinematography. Absolutely wonderful. I love that. And now we come to my least favorite part of the whole movie. I can forgive Tinkerbell flirting with a bird. I can overlook Wendy Darling being a weird rewritten Cinderella who can Mary Sue fight with a sword. I can forgive most of the inaccuracies of this movie because a lot of them were done to make things look better or to give it a different feel. What I cannot forgive them for is the major inaccuracy of Peter Pan, the boy who will not grow up, requiring Wendy's kiss to help him defeat Captain Hook. I'm gonna need a minute. It implies that Peter does actually secretly want to grow up. It implies that he has that sexuality to him. It implies so many things that are just not true of this character who still has all his milk teeth and is a literal child. I really don't like it. It makes me very uncomfortable. Yeah, that's where the movie completely lost me. Also, just to add a little bit more insult to injury, the way Captain Hook meets his demise is very comical and really not befitting this amazing character. Captain Hook does not have all the Lost Boys chanting at him, "Oh, alone, done for!" It's very reminiscent of how they did it in the Disney movie. He actually jumps. He goes to the crocodile willingly. He shouts Floriet Itono, which is Eton Flourishes, the motto of Eton School, and he goes contented to the crocodile. They really over-comedy that moment in the movie, and again, coming just after that really awkward kiss scene, it just... yeah, it ain't right. The end of the story is actually quite accurate. Mrs. Darling does at first think that the children are a dream. She doesn't realise they are really home because she's been dreaming about it so much. They're all delighted to realise that the children are really there. Of course they adopt all the rest of the Lost Boys, with the exception of Slightly. And this again is a moment where Aunt Millicent, this random character, takes over from Liza the maid. In the original play in the book, it is Liza the maid who tells Slightly that she must be his mother, and she takes him in. The idea of Peter forgetting to come back for Wendy is also accurate. However, he did come back for her to do a couple of spring cleanings before she became a grown-up. So the idea that the child Wendy never saw Peter again that they leave you with at the end of the movie is not entirely accurate. So, the 2003 movie adaptation of Peter Pan, starring my favourite Captain Hook of all time, Jason Isaacs. How did it do? I give it about 65% for accuracy to the original source material, and as I said, most of the stuff that they added or changed I can understand or forgive given what they were trying to do with it. However, the thing that ultimately lets them down for me is that kiss at the end. Yeah, I can never look past that and I can never forgive them for it, so ultimately I'm afraid I have to fail this movie as a Peter Pan adaptation. But ultimately, I don't want to let this put you off from watching this movie. I do recommend it. If it's the kind of thing that you're into, I would recommend reading the original play. It's very good, and the scene descriptions are just absolutely beautiful. And of course, I always recommend reading the book as well. Just make sure that it's the unabridged version, because the abridged just leaves out so much. So even though for me as a Peter Pan hobbyist and as an adaptation, this movie does fail spectacularly, I really don't mind it. There will be some more Peter Pan content from me coming very, very soon. If you'd like to support me, my Patreon does start at $3 a month and you get a whole load of benefits and perks. You can check out my Patreon for those. If you'd like to support me as and when you can do, I have Ko-fi as well. And if you'd like to commission a personalized in-character message, check out my Ko-fi as well. I have a variety of characters just waiting to send you a message from there too. I will have an interesting message about what I am doing for my final December cosplay, for my final 12 months of cosplay. I'll have an update on my Ashton very, very soon, and a message for what I'm going to do with my 2022 as well. In the meantime, goodbye my wonderful Jellyspoons, goodbye, and thank you for watching.